Get ready for some jaw-dropping ancient justice. The mighty Aztecs might have built a sophisticated empire with impressive feats in math and medicine from around 1,300 to 1,521. But their dark side is giving us serious chills. Their legal system was no joke, dishing out gruesome punishments even for minor infractions. Talk about strict law enforcement. Archaeologists are piecing together these shocking stories of Aztec justice, and trust me, you won't believe what they've uncovered so far. Warning, these ancient Aztec punishments are not for the faint-hearted. We've established they weren't messing around with murder, and taking an offender's life was seen as fitting revenge are. But that's just the start. In a shocking display of brutality, murders were often stoned or throttled to death at sacred temples, basically a public execution. But if you thought that was bad, get ready for the main course. Aztec officials would sometimes cook their prisoners alive over an open flame, yanking out their still beating heart from their chest. Talk about a deadly grilling. Fasten your seatbelts, guys. We're about to dive into some seriously gruesome ancient Aztec practices. While we've already explored their brutal murder punishment, let's look at the infamous sacrifice by heart removal, where prisoners were forced onto a sacrificial stone and an Aztec doctor would rip out their still beating heart with an obsidian blade. Sounds like a real thriller, right? But wait, it gets even more intense. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of around 550 victims at the Aztec site near Mexico City who met this horrific end. And what's crazy is that these finds suggest there was actual resistance to Aztec rule, not just total submission. And if you thought that was enough, here's another mind-blowing fact: the Aztecs basically had their own firing squad, but instead of bullets, it involved wool. So you guessed it, more gruesome public executions. Let's take a closer look at another one of the Aztecs' intense execution methods: war, where the victim would be tied upright between two posts, painted with a target on their chest, and then showered with arrows from all directions. But here's the chilling part: archers would spare the head and heart until last, making this a truly agonizing way to go. The Aztecs' reputation for ruthlessness isn't just based on their sacrificial practices. They were also known as fierce warriors who didn't hold back in punishing their war captives, earning them a fearsome rep throughout history. Now let's talk about how the Aztecs handled their prisoners of war, a far cry from turning them into slaves like many other civilizations did back then. Instead, these captives were often destined for a gruesome fate. To feed their hunger for human sacrifice, the Aztecs engaged in something called the Flower War. This wasn't your average battle. It was a ritualized fight that took place between the Aztec Triple Alliance and neighboring enemies like Tlaxcala, Huatzinggo, and Cholula, from around the 1450s till the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in 1519. The Flower War was actually born out of desperation, when droughts and famines hit hard, causing massive loss of life. The Aztecs believed it was a sign that their gods were upset because they weren't getting enough love. So, this bloody battle became a way for them to obtain fresh sacrifices to appease these gods and keep the divine party going. Here's how the story goes. The Aztecs believed that way back when, their heroic gods basically gave their lives to create humans and bring light to the world through the sun. But with this ultimate act of self-sacrifice came a blood debt. They needed to keep feeding their gods human blood in return for all the amazing things those gods had done. And so, it was up to the Aztecs to make sure this contract was paid by offering up warriors captured in battle, and even their own kids. Talk about a heavy responsibility. The Flower War might sound like a pretty name, but trust us, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park. While these ritual battles were usually less deadly than your average war, over time they started to get a whole lot more brutal. Let's dive deeper into how this whole Flower War thing played out. At first, the death toll was pretty low, but as time went on, things escalated quickly. Initially, when the Aztecs were battling the Chalcas, just a few warriors would lose their lives in each clash. But later on, captured regular folks got caught up in the mix and became victims too, unless they happened to be nobles, who might actually get spared. Unfortunately, even that privilege didn't last forever, and eventually everyone ended up facing the same grim fate. However, it's worth noting that not all captives met their end on the sacrificial altar. Take the Spanish invasion in 1520, for example. when archaeologists dug up an old site in Mexico. They found evidence of around 400 people who got caught up in a ritual sacrifice and cannibalism ceremony. Yes, you read that right, it's a pretty dark chapter in Aztec history. So, let's get into what made the Aztecs tick. They were all about war and saw it as a major part of their culture. One way they showed off their military might was by stacking skulls in a tower, known as a skull rack. I mean, who wouldn't be intimidated by that? And it's not just about being spooky R. It actually played into their mythology too. See, they had this god of war named Huitzilopochtli, and his birth story is pretty intense. He supposedly defeated his sister Coelzalki right when he was born, throwing her off a mountain called Coatipac where she shattered into pieces. This myth made him the ultimate authority figure. By dismembering his first challenger, Huitzilopochtli proved his power. From then on, every sacrifice that followed mirrored this legendary triumph of strength and domination. Let's break down how the Aztecs performed these sacrifices in detail. It's super vivid and intense. First, the victim was killed at the very top of the temple of Mayer Pyramid, which had a serpent-adorned exterior that felt like another mountain to conquer. Then, their heart would be ripped out right there on the summit, symbolizing the ultimate power of the Aztec gods. Next, the body would tumble down the temple stairs and land next to this massive carving of Coelzalki. It's as if her shattered pieces were a grim reminder of Huitzilopochtli's legendary victory. Finally, the victim's head was placed on the famous skull racks, serving as another trophy for the god, before their body was dismembered and shared among the Aztec people as a sign of honor. Each skull added to the legend of Huitzilopochtli's power, collecting more blood debt along the way. Even captured warriors weren't immune to this gruesome fate. They got to join the ranks of those who paid the ultimate price for Huitzilopochtli's glory. You've got to see this next part. It's a wild way Aztecs handled captured warriors. They'd tie these guys to a rock and hand them a flat cudgel, basically saying, okay, you're on your own against another warrior wielding a sharp-edged club. It was like a brutal game of rock, paper, scissors, but with serious consequences. This ritual showed just how much respect Aztecs had for even their enemies. They considered it the ultimate way to go out as a soldier. But discipline was huge in Aztec culture, and that started from a super young age. Kids learned early on about family values, hard work, and self-control. If things didn't go as planned, parents would remind them of the Migi cactus, sharp spines, talk about a parenting hack. And get this, daily chores. Yep, kids were doing those alongside their parents from practically day one. It's like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Let's dive into what life was like for these young Aztecs. Boys as young as 4 were already carrying water, snagging deals at the market with their dads, and learning the ins and outs of farming and fishing. Meanwhile, girls got hands-on experience helping mom with everyday tasks. Think corn grinding, household management, making tortillas from scratch, and weaving magic into fabrics. Now here's a fun fact in Aztecville. Kids under 10 were basically off the hook for their misbehaviors. We're talking gossiping, showing up looking less than sharp, mumbling like they've got something stuck in their teeth, or even sleeping in. You get the picture. The Aztecs believed that kiddos under 10 just couldn't do anything too terrible to be considered a serious offense. That's some pretty chill parenting right there. And did you know that archaeologist Kelly Thaley has been digging up the scoop on kids back in the Aztec Empire? Her findings, and those of fellow archaeologists, have given us a glimpse into what life was really like for these young ones. Here's a new script. You might think the Aztecs let their kiddos get away with anything, but not quite. Sure, they believed that under 10s were off the hook for most mischief, but their parents could still take them to court if the behavior was really bad. Once these young ones hit 12, things changed big time. Imagine being tied up and held over smoking chilies by your own folks' likes. That's what some sons might face as a punishment. The tears. Either they're feeling super guilty about their actions, or let's be real, those chili fumes are pretty intense. Now, it wasn't all equal opportunity discipline. If you were part of the nobility, disrespecting your elders, showing cowardice, or being wasteful could land you a death sentence. Yeah, it was a tough life, but hey, at least they learned to be on their best behavior. Here's a new script. The Aztecs lived by some pretty strict moral rules. Respect and obedience were key. These weren't just ideals for adults, kids were expected to follow them too. So, no wonder their laws cracked down hard on anything considered a moral fail. The punishments? Ouch. Not only could they be severe, but they often hit the entire family or even future generations. Now, you might think that how much stuff was stolen would matter when it came to punishment, but surprisingly, in Aztec land, that wasn't always the case. The rules were pretty standard: one mistake, big consequences. Let's dive into Aztec justice for small-time thefts. If you got caught swiping something worth a bit, you'd have to cough up a fine that was twice the item's value. Talk about paying it forward. The good news is you'd give back some cash straight to the victim as apology pay and hand over the rest to the state as taxes. But if you were really struggling to make ends meet, there was another option. The victim could turn you into their personal slave instead. Now, most thieves didn't get off easy. They faced swift punishment for their sneaky moves. However, it's worth noting that there were a few situations where the Aztecs looked the other way and let minor theft slide. Here's a wild one. Sometimes, minor theft was actually part of an Aztec religious ritual. Let's break down the Pankitsalti ceremony. It pitted two groups against each other: students from the Telpakali school for ordinary kids and those from the Kalmakak school for elite sons. The competition was fierce, with the winning team getting to take control. If the Kalmakak crew took home the win, they'd get to toss their Telpakali opponents in Tolachuani's palace clink and help themselves to whatever goodies they could find inside. Talk about a game changer. But if the underdogs from Telpakali stole the show, it was the Kalmakak students who'd be singing the blues, locked up in their own school building with nothing but regret. Imagine if in Westeros, besides breaking vows to the Iron Throne, crossing certain personal boundaries could be considered treason too. In reality, Aztecs took their laws super seriously. They had zero tolerance for corruption among officials, like judges who sold out justice for a quick buck. If caught, these corrupt folks would face brutal public punishment. But here's where things get really interesting in the Aztec world. Adultery and same-sex relationships were viewed as threats to the social order because family ties were seen as the backbone of society. So, anyone caught engaging in such behavior could be considered a menace to the state. Talk about a different kind of Game of Thrones drama. In the eyes of the Aztecs, family wasn't just about love. It was also about loyalty and following strict rules. For them, any kind of romantic or physical connection outside of marriage was super taboo, especially between a person and someone who was already part of another household. If you were caught cheating as a married couple, both partners could face the ultimate penalty: death by sacrifice. Even if you just knew about the affair and didn't report it, that was considered wrong too. But here's where things get really wild. In Aztec society, same-sex relationships took it to another level of forbidden. Some stories say people with these attractions were punished in super gruesome ways, like being impaled. It's worth noting though, men who cheated on their wives only faced the music if they were caught with a married woman. It seems like some rules were more flexible than others. Let's dive into the harsh reality of Aztec law. When it came to cheating, married women were always held accountable, no matter who they hooked up with. It wasn't a tabloid show like Jerry Springer. Instead, it was serious business that could lead to a gruesome fate. Cheating couples weren't the only ones who faced capital punishment. The Aztecs had a long list of crimes that called for death, including lying under oath, physical attacks, abandoning family, practicing witchcraft, intermarrying with certain groups, and even causing public chaos. Can you believe it? This ancient civilization was not afraid to get brutal when enforcing its rules. Their methods of execution were just as extreme. From hanging to being torn apart by horses, the Aztecs left no stone unturned in their quest for justice. So, the real question is, would you want to live through this intense